The legal system is supposed to protect the vulnerable, but too often it is manipulated into exploiting them. From coast to coast guardianship and conservatorship abuse, where seniors are cheated and stripped of their liberty and property, is a glaring yet unreported example of this insidious phenomenon. The hit Hollywood movie I Care a Lot and high-profile cases of guardianship and conservatorship abuse, like those of Britney Spears and Joan Mama B. Bashinsky, have brought the issue to national attention, which long has been needed. Imagine opening your door one day and there's a person standing there holding a piece of paper that gives them total legal power over you. That terrifying idea seems very relevant right now. These cases often go unnoticed by the general public or are supported because it's believed that the decision is for the older person's own good. But the circumstances surrounding conservatorships are so ethically ambiguous that the whole system has been under scrutiny for decades. In 2018, the United States Senate Committee on Aging called for a major overhaul in the guardianship system, warning that unscrupulous guardians have used their position to get control of vulnerable people and then liquidate assets and savings for their own personal benefit. Too many Americans remain unaware of just how widespread and terrible guardianship abuse and conservatorship abuse truly are. In 2020, a Florida senior named Jan Garwood was wrongfully placed under professional guardianship by predators after being involved in a car crash. The crash wasn't the result of any sort of physical incapacitation or mental deterioration. She was simply a shattered woman grieving over the death of her son. One of the most illuminating examples is the case of guardian April Parks, who was convicted in 2019 on over 100 counts of perjury, dozens of charges for theft and elder exploitation, and 1 count of racketeering. A Google search of Guardian Abuse Florida retrieves well over 2.4 million results in less than a half a second. The headlines speak for themselves, painting a vivid picture of the corruption necessary in a number of professional fields to pull off such horrific predatory scams. And here's just a few. It's clear to see that Florida has a major guardianship abuse problem and why guardianship abuse might be so attractive to criminal predators. In Florida, absolutely anyone can file a petition for guardianship, regardless of the relationship with the victim. Moreover, Florida guardians can be paid up to $95 an hour for their services, and their lawyers can be paid upwards of $400 an hour. That's to say nothing of the control guardianship abusers receive over the personal assets of their victims. It's not just Florida. Stories like this abound in California, Alabama, and elsewhere. These stories also make something else abundantly clear. Guardianship abuse may more correctly be thought of as guardian, medical, and legal abuse, because without unethical, predatory individuals in all of those fields working together, such abuse is impossible to carry out. It takes more than a corrupt guardian to do these terrible things. It takes a corrupt guardian, a corrupt lawyer, a corrupt doctor, often a corrupt nursing home or hospital, and finally, corrupt judges. Guardianship laws and conservatorship laws are well-intentioned, designed to protect the truly incapacitated and vulnerable from those who would take advantage of them. Legislators in Florida are trying to fix the problem, but there's still a long way to go, and the issue needs far more attention at the national level from Congress. When a system designed to protect people can be easily twisted into a weapon to cause harm, there's a serious problem. It's time we end that problem in the guardianship system. In this insider-exclusive network TV special, Predatory Guardianships in America's Courtrooms, our news team is on location in Tampa, Florida to meet with Ronald Denman, Kindrick, and Jonathan Newlon, who represent Doris Hadcock's estate in an ongoing case that reflects a bizarre and disturbing scheme by the professional guardians, attorneys, and assisted living facility involved, even to the extent of improper collaboration with Florida's DCF, Department of Children and Families, to take advantage of her, and who abused and financially exploited her during her forced nightmare guardianship and confinement at Somerset, an assisted living facility in Tavares, Florida. From March 5th, 2016 through January 2019, Doris's professional guardian and guardianship attorney sold all of her real and personal property, including 4 houses in New York and Florida, several cars, and all of her family heirlooms, even her wedding ring. Doris was left penniless in New York and passed away in January of this year. Here's Ron Denman to share some of that nightmare story.
My name is Ron Denman. I'm a lawyer at Bleakley Bavol Denman Grace. One of the areas that I focus my practice in is guardianship litigation, and usually that involves trying to protect a person's rights when they're being involuntarily put into a guardianship. A ward of the state is a bit of a misnomer because a ward is the legal name that's placed upon an individual who someone seeks to put into a guardianship. Once anybody can file a petition to have somebody involuntarily put into a guardianship and be stripped of all of their rights. Once a person has been adjudicated or determined to be incapacitated of some or all of their rights in Florida, then the term is known as a ward. They're given a guardian is appointed. The guardians must operate through attorneys, which means that there's additional layer of expense. And then from that point on, the attorneys and the guardian essentially represent the ward. Depending upon the nature of the incapacity, guardians can be given 100% control of a ward, the person who's been alleged to be incapacitated, given 100% control of all of their rights. In some cases, for example, someone may not have the ability to handle money, so the guardian may be appointed just over the property. And if it's for everything, then it would be called a plenary, just means a guardian over everything, person and property. Unfortunately, in Florida, it's very easy for guardians to exploit wards. There have been situations that have come to light lately where guardians have had dozens of cases and have stolen hundreds of thousands, if not millions, from their wards. It is very easy for a guardian to manipulate those laws and to take actions with the assistance of bad attorneys and essentially milk the estates of those wards dry. Since 2015, there has been efforts to reform the guardianship laws in the legislature. There are some advocates out there that are doing the best they can to bring this to the attention of lawmakers and change. Since 2015, unfortunately, changes have not been enough. If anything, I've seen changes that actually protect guardians and the guardians' attorneys. There's now some new legislation which you can bring an injunction if someone's being isolated from family members, but still the procedures and the relief, the question of how quickly you can get the relief, what the end is still remains to be seen.
Currently, the abuse and often illegal actions by Florida's guardians and their lawyers are being looked at by a task force formed by Florida's state Supreme Court. The state legislature established the new Office of Public and Professional Guardianship as a result of lobbying by advocacy groups and others about lawyers and guardians siphoning off fees. Ron has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. He has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Florida and across the United States. Ron has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down, and his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Tampa, Florida. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ron Denman to the show, as well as Grant Kindrick. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Ron, tell us a little bit about your law firm. What type of law does your firm practice?
Our law firm practices today a variety of different areas. When I started at the firm about 7 years ago, it mainly did litigation and came aboard to do litigation. And really at that point had brought a couple of cases with me in the guardianship area. And since that time, guardianship trust estates has grown immensely in our firm. We have about 25 attorneys and really we provide full service. But I'd say a big part of our firm is litigation.
Grant, we're here today talking about a case about Doris Hadcock. Can you tell our audience a little bit about the facts of this case?
Sure. The case is a long, complicated saga, but boiled down to its essence, the case is really about a situation where an assisted living facility got together with people that they had relationships with in the government and with people in the legal community and with professional guardians. And what they did was they all worked together to deprive Doris Hadcock of all of her civil rights by establishing what's called a plenary guardianship, which removes all of her rights, all the rights that an American citizen would have. And then once those rights were stripped, they kept her in an assisted living facility that she did not want to be in. They wouldn't let her leave despite her repeated requests. And meanwhile, they liquidated all of her assets, sold 4 of her homes, sold all of her personal property, all the way down to her wedding ring. She was left with nothing by the time it was all said and done. And the most heartbreaking thing about the case was that they separated her and her husband of over who had been married for over 60 years.
They were in the same facility there for a while, right?
They were, but they were separated in the facility. And she was really isolated from everybody that she knew, including her husband.
Yeah, it would seem to me that, you know, if I was related to Doris, for example, let's say I was her son or something, and I saw this going on, and clearly it's wrong, that you'd want to call the police. You know, someone is stealing money from my mother, for example. Calling the police doesn't do any good, does it?
Well, in this situation, because the government is already involved in the form of the DCF, Adult Protective Services, it seems by all appearances that things are being looked over, things are being overseen. The court is involved. But what's really going on, the court doesn't know. DCF, to a large degree, doesn't know. And, you know, from a 20,000-foot view, it might look like everything is okay. But the only person who really knows that things are wrong is the elderly person, Doris. And in this case, nobody was listening to her, really.
Your law firm was brought in after everything was sold, or what?
Right. Everything was sold. She had nothing left. The only thing she had left was an undeveloped piece of land, and that was it.
So you mentioned that lawyers that are representing someone in this kind of case where they still have assets available can make motions before the court and says, whoa, stop this. Let's examine what's really going on. How is that taken in the court?
It depends on the court. It depends on the jurisdiction. But many times what ends up happening is that because the guardians are represented by counsel that are very often in front of the same courts in smaller communities, in a even smaller legal community, in the probate community, there's so much familiarity that there's a lot of deference that's given to professional guardians and their attorneys that are representing them. So the level of scrutiny that's paid to what they're doing in terms of selling property is, in some cases, especially this one, just not adequate.
We have, you guys watched a movie on Netflix called I Care a Lot, right? A lot of people and lawyers and judges are well aware that there are guardians out there that are ripping people off, correct? So in this case and in the Bivens case that we discussed in another show, there was a lot of money paid to lawyers. There's a lot of money paid to lawyers, a lot of money paid to guardians. What is a judge who is unquestionably not looking at any kind of potential wrongs here? What is the judge getting out of this?
Well, in most cases, the judge is probably not going to be getting anything out of it. The judge has a lot of these cases in front of them, and the judge is only going to have knowledge of what is presented to the judge in the courtroom. So, you know, really what they're getting out of it is going to be nothing except in the most extreme and extraordinary circumstances, which isn't the case here. But the problem is that they're not getting enough, and what they're not getting is information.
Okay, so your law firm has entered the picture. You have alerted the judge to the fact that a lot of things went wrong in this guardianship, correct?
So what we have done is, rather than bring the case in front of the same court that presided over the underlying guardianship with Doris, we filed our case in federal court. So there's a federal court judge looking at it, and that's totally different than the way that a probate judge would look at.
Why is it totally different?
The reason that it's totally different is because a federal court is not going to ever be overseeing any kind of guardianship. It's just never going to happen. It's not something that would happen under the law. And when a federal court or a jury is looking at what happens in these kinds of cases, the way that they look at it is with a fresh set of eyes, and the way that any normal, common sense person would look at this problem. And they don't like what they see.
Let's talk a little bit about Doris. She worked for the railroad before, correct?
Right.
She retired. She was a snowbird, I guess, right? Driving down from New York. How did she get involved with all of this mess?
It was an unfortunate coincidence, I would say. She had an injury to her back. She said that she was lifting boxes and strained her back. Was in intractable pain. She had to go to the hospital. And that's when this kind of thing typically starts. Guardianships of this nature, these exploitative guardianships, typically begin when an individual who's elderly has some need for emergency medical care. And that's what begins the process. Here she went to the ER. Then she went to a rehabilitation center so that she could rehabilitate her back. And then from the rehabilitation center, that's when she was essentially railroaded.
Tell me about Elizabeth Hyman.
Elizabeth Hyman is a defendant in the case, and she's someone that we're suing. She's the administrator of Somerset Assisted Living Facility. She's basically the person that runs this assisted living facility. And by all appearances, it seems that she is at the heart of what has occurred in this case. She refused to let Doris Hadcock leave her facility. It seems that she was instrumental in actually getting Doris into the facility against Doris's will by manipulating documents that are necessary to put a person into an assisted living facility. She also didn't follow any of the protocols and procedures that are outlined to protect the elderly in the state of Florida. And that paved the way for what had occurred to Doris.
This is an ongoing case.
Yes, this is an ongoing case.
And what are some of the challenges that you're facing in this case?
Some of the challenges are the degree to which the parties will protect each other because they work with each other in many instances. So that's really the record keeping, the documents, communications that are considered to be privileged, even though Doris is paid for all of the attorneys for the guardians. The communications between the guardians and the attorneys that she's paying for are privileged.
How much money are we talking about here? They liquidated everything that she owned. What did that come to? And how much did her estate, she passed away this year, right? How much has been paid out?
Well, a few $100,000, which for blue-collar workers that worked their entire lives together, they amassed a decent amount of money. And what's interesting is that there are emails that show that everyone knew what they had beforehand and knew that this was, if you go back to that movie, I Care a Lot, the cherry, knew that there was someone who could pay the bills, could take care of things. And it's remarkable. If any case was similar to I Care a Lot, which is unbelievably accurate of many guardianships that we get, this is one of those cases.
The trial is set sometime next year, correct? Is that right? Right. Do you see it delaying or settling anytime in the future?
Based on what we've seen in these kinds of cases historically, they are not cases that typically settle. Yeah. Usually they have to go to trial. And part of the reason that that's the case is because in many instances, for whatever reason, the people that are involved in this kind of activity, especially the ones that are facilitating it, don't really see what they're doing as necessarily even wrong or something that the law doesn't permit. It's rather shocking.
Very righteous about their actions. How dare you question what I've done? I've done everything just perfectly. And so what if I made a lot of money? I deserved it because I did such a great job of liquidating this person, cutting off their fans, their family, their friends. I did such a great job of running their life the way I chose to run their life. How dare you question me?
Ron, tell us the real harm in this case.
The real harm in this case is you have a couple that had been married for almost 70 years, had done everything together their entire lives, that were living independently until Doris got injured. And when she goes into the hospital to have her back worked on, her husband is taken to Somerset without her knowing what's going on. She then gets transferred into Somerset without knowing what's going on. She's then locked there. At some point when she's trying to make noise to get out of there, they separate her from her husband. She's essentially imprisoned there. And in your twilight of your life where you want to spend that time together, she's separated. Her husband is gone through, is abused. She's trying her hardest to get out, and nobody's listening. And then when she finally gets relief and finally gets a judge to say, okay, you can decide where you want to live, in December of 2015, they hold her for another 3 months against her will. She's packing her bags to leave and ready to go, and they hold her for another 3 months, ignoring the court's order. And then she has to actually kiss her husband goodbye that she's been with for her entire life and say goodbye, telling him, I'll be back for you. And 30 days later, he dies. And then she finds out that she's penniless and they've sold off all the assets to pay for the guardians and the attorneys and everyone else.
Great work on the cases that you've handled, and we wish you success on the Hadcock case. And thank you for being with us. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.